Good afternoon. Bakhair Benawa. I know sometimes after lunchtime we may not have as much energy or as much patience to listen, but I promise you this is going to be a very exciting panel. And we have some wonderful guests here with us, and it'll be very interesting to hear their insights on this next panel. Does everybody have their translation equipment? This session is going to be in English. Okay. Okay. Again, welcome, and thank you for being patient. I know we're running a little bit behind. But in this session, we're going to be focusing on the regional and global power dynamics in the Middle East. And then we're going to be talking about conflict and collaboration. As we all know, the Middle East is still in great turmoil, with rival powers communicating less than they should. While several fragile and/or failed states are engaged in conflicts or proxy wars, over the years, the region and global powers' policies and alliances have been changing with time. In the Middle East, however, they appear to diverge in some areas and converge or even cooperate in others. The guests that we have to discuss this and some of the other points are His Excellency Ambassador Fatih Yildiz, who is the Turkish ambassador to Iraq. His Excellency Ambassador Roman Balkiu. Did I say that right? Blekwa, apologies. He is the European Union's ambassador, and I'm sure you've heard him all speak before. And we'll also have with us Ambassador Alberto Fernandez, who is president of the Middle East Broadcasting Networks, and Ghani An Tarif, Ambassador Luqman Faili. He is also a former Iraqi ambassador to Japan and the United States. So what we'll do is we'll start the session with giving everybody about 8 to 10 minutes to speak, and then we will open the floor to questions, and we will take questions from everybody. So Mr. Ambassador Fatih Yildiz,
Sure,
if you would like to start.
Thank you for the invitation, first and foremost. And it's a distinct pleasure to be here at this forum, which is a very prestigious one, which I have heard a lot, but it's my first opportunity to speak now. Yes, I guess Turkey is one of those countries that applies very much to the topic that you select for this session. Yes, we are one of those regional countries, let's say, when it comes to specifically issues related to Iraq. And as the ambassador of Turkey here, who's now Erbil, but who spent the last 2 days in Mosul, in Tel Afar, I should say, I came with some fresh feelings, sentiments from the region. And I, as the representative of Turkey, with my 2 feet on the Iraqi soil, I always feel myself as a part of this country. And I felt during the last 2 days, as a Maslavi, I should say, I was from Mosul last 2 days, but I always name myself as a Baghdadi. Today I speak as an Erbili, I should say. And my wife, who stayed here for the last 2 days, she, I guess, made a lot of contribution to your local tourism, and by shopping a lot during the last 2 days. I thank her as well in terms of the PR that she did for me during those 2 days. Well, Turkey, as one of the countries which is very much affected from all the bad and good in this region. Of course, we have a vision for the challenges that the countries of the region and peoples of the region are facing, and it's always unfortunate that one of the regions on the earth that hosts one of the oldest, let's say, civilizations need to face such challenges still. And these challenges, in fact, are those that must have been, I should say, already overcome, as it applies for many other regions around the world, because the challenges are mainly around, religion, sects, and ethnicity, I should say. And our vision for the region is that the challenges that we need to be addressing, that we need to be working more, are mostly about people and about the development of people, progress of people. That's why Turkey has such a vision for the region as being a part of this region, and a country which, I should say, persevered a lot when it comes to problems that I have enumerated, ranging from religion to ethnicity to sectarian values. So we have accumulated quite an experience. We are a functioning democracy, we have a market economy, but all of these things in Turkey are works in progress. So we are not there yet when it comes to these goals. Therefore, while we have to face our own challenges back at home, we firmly believe that we need to address the challenges that are being faced in general in the region. And the problem of security, and of course, which is very much related to the development aspect of the problems here in the region, are the questions that we are mostly focusing in Turkey. And if we, let's say, enumerate a wide range of, let's say, priorities that we have to face, of course, we tend to enumerate them in four when we speak about Middle East. And of course, one of the major challenges, of course, although it seems distant from the current geography that we are in now, it's first and foremost is the Palestinian problem, and there is a total rejection and ignorance regarding people's right to express and exist in Palestine. And despite all initiatives, Israel seems to continue all its illegal settlements in East Jerusalem and West Bank, where it occupies more than 50 years. Frankly speaking, to start the words with the Palestinian problem in such a conflict-ridden area may not be the right appropriate time, but I should say that as long as we cannot redress this deep feelings of injustice emanating from Palestine, believe me, there is not a better future for us all in this region, including here in Iraq as well. And of course, second comes Syria. Syria is, as a neighbor, is a challenge for Turkey. There is no denial of this fact. Unfortunately, this issue turned into a story of not being able to find any solutions, neither for Turks nor for any other regional partners or any international players. The problem in the area ending conflicts are only possible thanks to the efforts of few countries. And political process is not progressing at all in Syria as desired. And we are one of the countries that suffered a lot when it comes to the humanitarian aspect of the crisis in Syria. As you know, Turkey is hosting over 3 million Syrians in Turkey. We name them as guests of Turkey, not being able to extend them any other official status, because it is really beyond the definition of the literal definition of refugees that people were talking about. But we need to be addressing this problem, not only in terms of its humanitarian aspects, but political and security aspects as well. And Turkey, with some other key partners, is doing its best in terms of addressing the problems out in the field. Third challenge is, in fact, is about here, about Iraq, that we actively try to contribute. Still, territorial integrity and political unity of Iraq is at stake. Iraq has not raised the level of inclusiveness in terms of its politics, economy, and societal relations, I should say. So the problem seems to be the fact that the upper identity of Iraqiness we refer to is not there yet. Iraq seems to be much more focused on ethnic, religious, and sectarian identities. And that's one of the main challenges. As I've highlighted in the beginning, Turkey has been facing these challenges for years. But we need to overcome these challenges so that we can focus more on progress and development in Iraq. And that's why we are one of the key partners for Iraq when it comes to these areas. Fourth challenge for a Turkish diplomat is, of course, another neighbor, which is Iran. The dismissal of Iran nuclear deal by one of the parties is, of course, a matter of concern for us all. Disregarding such a deal with Iran, which we all worked hard on it, after so intensive efforts, will be another blow to the peace and stability in the region. That's how we see it. And Turkey is again one of the countries that does not put much belief in the regimes of sanctions in such cases. Therefore, we still value the deal that was agreed by us all with Iran, and this is not the way that the Iranian nuclear problem needs to be dealt with. That's how we see it. And in the face of all these, of course, as a country that is an associate member of EU, that has one of its eye on EU, on Europe, but on the other hand, very much, embedded in Middle East, which we always say we have multiple identities. We think that in terms of addressing these challenges, Turkey can play an important role, and of course get the necessary inputs from the region. Of course, with consultation with all its partners in Iraq, Iran, Syria, and others, to chart the right way in terms of addressing these challenges. Frankly speaking, I will speak in very general terms. I'm looking forward to the Q&A session, which I believe will be a very interactive one. Thank you again for your patience and attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. You definitely laid the points out quite well in terms of, as they say, putting the fingers on exactly where the challenges are and what they are to Turkey. I think when we talk about when we open the floor to questions, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions coming from the audience with regards to some of the challenges and some of the internal challenges that can affect what is happening in the region. As you spoke about the multiple identities of Turkey and looking forward to being in the EU, I think it's only befitting that the ambassador to the EU talks about the challenges in what they foresee as the challenges in the area, and if there's going to be any room for new alliances, if there's going to be any room for, as they say, tipping of the scales between the different powers in the region. So, Mr. Blancois.
Thank you, Tanya. Well, just starting from the very title of the panel about the global dynamics as well, I think we should put the regional ones in perspective of what is happening at a more global level. I think the main challenge now we are facing is what some people define as the threat to multilateralism. The current US administration, and Alberto Fernandez will probably expand on this topic, seems to be bent on changing the same or the very international order the US built after the Second World War in cooperation with other main international powers. And that is certainly creating a whole new dynamic at a global level, from trade wars to abandoning international treaties, and the latest one is obviously the unilateral withdrawal from the JCPOA and the imposition of sanctions on Iran that will reach its ultimate conclusion on the 5th of November. Well, obviously, these elements that are affecting from the own partnership with the European Union, the future of NATO, the relationship with long-standing allies like Turkey and others, to, of course, what they were traditionally defined as revisionist countries, those who wanted to change the current international order, and were mainly China, India, Iran, they were defined, or Russia, as the ones that really felt that there was not anymore this unipolar world, and the international structures should adapt to this multipolarity. Well, what we are seeing now is basically an increase in tensions all over the place. Wherever there is a conflict, it seems to be exacerbated, it seems to be brought to breaking point, sometimes in a calculated manner, sometimes maybe unintendedly. But this is now, we're talking what's happening in the region with the JCPOA. We already had an obvious, how would I say, I wouldn't say confrontation, but opposition between the anti-Iranian coalition built around, of course, the US leadership, but with a very clear participation and implication of other regional powers, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and what the so-called axis of resistance, those countries or powers allied to Iran. The JCPOA was some sort of safety net that kept not only the Iranian nuclear deal or nuclear program in check and under strict supervision, but also the regional tensions. Now, with this treaty in jeopardy, despite, well, the EU and the other international members of the Security Council that are part of it and still adhere to it, trying to keep the deal alive. But the question is that international tensions will rise. And as I mentioned in my intervention yesterday, I think that comes at probably one of the most dangerous moments in recent history in the region. And I think the fact that we are looking at a scenario that, as I define, is very similar to World War I, when the countries in Europe walked into a conflict that lasted 4 years and nearly destroyed every single thing that remained from the old Europe in the process, a part of millions of dead, and walk into it inadvertently by a system of alliances that started to trigger implication of countries in this war in an automatic manner, and everybody thinking this is going to be short and we are going to be on top. Well, there's no such a thing as a short war, and certainly none that ends the way it's intended at the beginning. So I think we should be very careful about the steps we take, because the conflicts in the region, they are not isolated anymore. And I think Daesh has been a very important reminder. When fighters coming out of their defeat in Iraq move immediately into Libya or Mali or Syria or Yemen, that is an element that is already showing how you cannot contain these conflicts anymore. And even the international community that's been trying to build mechanisms for crisis resolution and crisis management, we may be able to handle one or two. But if several of these crises simultaneously get into a meltdown process, we will be unable. We cannot. And we, of course, we're not thinking, and I will be the last one to say, well, a doomsday scenario is likely. But if in a case of confrontation in which these sort of links are so closely aligned in terms of the interest of regional countries, one conflict, one spark in one particular area could immediately trigger a series of interlinked confrontations. I don't think we should look at this lightly. Now, after I delivered the bad news, let's start with the good news. Well, I think Iraq has a role to play there. And I think Iraq, by its unique capacity to integrate contradictions and multiple identities, as Ambassador Fatih just mentioned, that I believe is really something that will be the future of this region. And I always remember this, one of the most important books I read on the Middle East is a book by Peter Fromkin, A Peace to End All Peace. It's a book about the demise of the Ottoman Empire and the post-colonial order in the Middle East, and how the Peace of Sèvres was actually the beginning of all the wars in this region. And we can say to a certain extent we are living now the unsolved problems that the end of the First World War left in this region. So it is very important to understand that the stability of the region was based on the multiple identities. There was no contradiction between being Maslawi, Christian, and subject of the Sultan, or a Jew, Baghdadi, and also integrated in the same political alliance. And there were extremely multi-layered systems of intra-communal relations that kept the whole social fabric together. To a large extent, it has been the introduction of these exclusive identities, something that has a lot to do with the Western colonial order and what was the result of it. But that has been then brought to an extreme development by the new reinterpretations, for example, of Islamic orthodoxy, or the new version of Islamic identity of which Daesh is the ultimate representative, that are basically intolerant, fanatical, exclusive. And everything that doesn't fit in this identity should be destroyed, exterminated, eliminated. And we have the examples in Mosul that one of the Daesh did not focus necessarily on Christian or even on the synagogue, neither churches nor the synagogue. It was mainly on this unique eclectic Islamic architecture that was systematically destroyed. So we may think now that the reconstruction of Mosul is just a luxury of, recreating an old city. It's much more than that. It's about these multiple identities. It's about this social fabric. It's about reviving what precisely Daesh wanted to destroy. And I think it's very timely that the government is focusing on this, and I think there is going to be a task force that actively will address the urgent solutions that the city needs, and we are certainly closely working with it, and we are going to be one of the countries leading in it, with the Emirates as well, and hope that certainly Turkey will be there and many others, because Mosul needs all the help it can get, as you very well know. So I think I will stop there, because there's time for debate.
Great.
And
thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think, yeah, definitely what some of the points that you talked about in terms of looking at it from a global perspective, that is very important. But as we have been discussing here in the last couple of days, we've been talking about quite a bit about how the regional powers can help. And I love the idea that you talked about how Iraq can really play a role, because it really is important for Iraq as a country that has always been on the reactive force more rather than taking initiative. So, you know, it brings up the question whether Iraq can really be a change maker in the region, and it can really take its place in that. So I'm sure that we can discuss that a little bit later. But now to you, Mr. Fernandez, Ambassador, the floor is yours. I'm not going to start with questions.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. It's a pleasure to be in Erbil for the first time. I've been to Iraq many times when I was a U.S. diplomat, but this is the first time that I've been here in the Kurdistan regional government, and so it's a real pleasure to be here with all of you today. I am a former American diplomat, so I'm speaking in my own voice, in my own opinion. I'm not speaking for the government of the United States. But I think there's a basic misunderstanding when we look at the region with respect to the EU and our friends here that kind of present a mythological view of the region, as if the region has been perfectly fine and everything is well. Multilateralism is such a well-oiled machine, whereas the reality is that the region is not going to be in a crisis or going to have several crises. The region has been in a crisis for over almost 40 years. Ala Fikra, by the way, yesterday was the 35th anniversary of the killing of 250 US Marines in Beirut on a peacekeeping mission, and by the way, 50 French paratroopers by Iran, by an organization which is now called Hezbollah. So the idea that somehow disaster is going to happen, that somehow violence is going to break out, is not the way that things really are. I think the region is in tremendous turmoil. It is in a crisis, a deep crisis, which is likely to get worse before it gets better. It is that way because many of the structural reasons for this crisis, which are endemic to the region, have never been addressed. There's this wonderful phrase in Arabic we use about Qamis Othman, right? Waving the red shirt. And all too often, for decades in the region, people have had this Qamis Othman, whether that's Palestine or this or that or whatever, and didn't deal with the root causes of the problems in the region. Disastrous governance by regimes in the region. Corruption on a global scale in the region. Socioeconomic factors that should make your hair stand on end in terms of the difference between the haves and the have-nots, unemployment rates, future prospects, economic prospects. If you look at the Arab Youth Survey, you see that Arab youth, the things that they're most concerned about are their economic future, about the lousy universities they have that will not prepare them for the future, and how corruption makes a future life of dignity impossible for them. These things are not being addressed. They're not being addressed by any country in the region. Some are speaking about it more, and some are speaking about it less, but they haven't really been addressed. Now, these problems that I've discussed exist in non-Arab countries. They exist in Turkey, they exist in Iran, but they're much worse in the Arab League countries. The reality of what's happening between Morocco and the Gulf is much more dire than even the countries of sub-Saharan Africa or the Balkans or other parts of Asia. Much more dire, much more severe. You have a democracy like Tunisia. I was just in Tunisia just days ago. A democracy with 35% unemployment rate, 50% among youth. This is not something which is sustainable over time. And this crisis is not just economic, socio, and political, but it's an intellectual and a spiritual crisis. All of the building blocks that led to the rise of Daesh are all there, they're unaddressed. And so there's this connection between a horrific political, economic, social crisis and a kind of extremism which is not going away. I think the US and the American administration is trying to look at this, but trying to look at this in a realistic view. First of all, I think the United States wants to help reverse these trends, but it's not going to be more royal than the king. It's not going to be more committed to nation building than the states of the region are committed to nation building. I think one of the hallmarks of the Trump administration, which is absolutely right, is to try to begin to reverse the disastrous Middle East policies of the Obama administration. A lot of what we're living today is a result of disastrous policy decisions taken by the Obama administration. Whether it is deciding that this terrorist group in Iraq was a minor thing that didn't need to be worrying about, or the hypocrisy of the policy on Syria, which is intimately connected to the success of the JCPOA. The JCPOA is built on the blood of tens of thousands, of hundreds of thousands of Syrians slaughtered by the Assad regime with the help of Iran and Hezbollah, etc. This is a reality. So when we talk about a bomb might go off in the future because of this JCPOA, guess what? The bomb has already gone off. The slaughter has already occurred. So the Trump administration is looking to aggressively reverse this disastrous Obama administration policy in the region. What does that mean? Obviously, it means a real response to the unchecked aggression by revisionist powers in the region, especially Iran. And it means to reforge ties with our traditional allies in the region, like Turkey, like our traditional allies in the Arab world, that have been so frayed and so shattered by the years of the Obama administration. Now, I think these steps that the Trump administration is taking to do this are the right thing to do. They're important, they're useful. However, these steps in trying to bring a kind of a minimal status quo or a minimal stability or a minimal pushback against Iranian aggression in the region is not an immediate solution, nor is it a long-term one. Because the problems, even though, for example, I think, and I've said, Iranian foreign policy, Iranian aggression in the region is so disastrous. In the end, what the Iranians have done is put gasoline on an already raging fire. So the larger structural problems of the region are something that is not going to be addressed by anyone if it's not addressed by the governments in the region. So as I said, reaching that kind of midway of stability is not a long-term solution, and that lies in the hands of governments in the region, which the challenge remains whether they are capable of actually rising to the challenge. I'm pessimistic as someone who's lived in the region and worked in the region for 40 years, who speaks Arabic and who's lived here for many, many years. I'm pessimistic about the region. Because I think that the lack of a thirst for real reform, for real change, is a huge problem. And no multilateral system, no foreign governments can actually do more for the region than the region does for itself. Even though I'm pessimistic about the region, however, I'm slightly more optimistic about Iraq. Why? I mean, Iraq has many problems. You've all discussed many of these very serious problems that the Iraqi people have faced. I'm a little more positive about Iraq because I think there is at least an effort to address some of these very larger issues that plague the region as a whole. His Excellency, the Turkish ambassador, for example, talked about the issue of sectarianism and ethnicity in Iraq, and certainly that's an issue here. But if we see the elections that we saw in Iraq this year, we see, I think, positive signs, maybe small, maybe not enough, that there is an effort, that there is a possibility of overcoming this poisonous sectarianism, which is found so often in the region, and which indeed has been a problem in Iraq in the past. I think we see some positive elements that lead us to believe that maybe that's going to be an issue that at least is being talked about, and at least there are attempts to try to address. In other parts of the region, there is no attempt to address it. When we talk, for example, of the tension between Iraqi Kurds and non-Kurdish Iraqis, there are countries in the region where that issue of Kurdish rights have not been addressed, or even there's been retrogression in these issues. So at the very least in Iraq, there is an effort to try to seriously talk about these things. The same thing is true with extremism. The fact that the Iraqi people and the Iraqi security forces, with the help of the international community, overcame, not completely defeated, but overcame the threat of Daesh compared to what it was in 2014, is a positive element. And again, when I talked about corruption and the lack of state functioning, the lack of states providing services or a better life for its people, the reality that we had thousands of Iraqi citizens standing up for their rights in Basra and in other places of Iraq, this is not a bad thing. This is a good thing. This is actually, I think, a reason for hope about Iraq, that there are people who are willing to stand up and talk and demand their human dignity, demand their rights, demand that their governments fulfill their basic responsibilities of providing a decent life for its citizens. So, even though I'm very pessimistic about the region, even though I think that the Trump administration is trying to bring a little more stability out of an inherently unstable area, I think that there's a little bit of hope in what we've seen from the Iraqi people this year. There's a lot more I can say, but I'll stop there. Thank you.
Well, I think, I'm sure, I'm going to give you some, I think I'm going to give the gentleman an opportunity to answer some of these points, because you really did raise some very, it's very provocative. Thank you. And now we move on to Ambassador Faili, and what your توقعاتك, or what your vision is, or what your understanding is of what how the global these new powers that are coming up, and how they would actually affect the region in particular, and the region in general, and Iraq in particular.
Sure. Thank you very much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First of all, thank you again for giving me a second panel opportunity to talk about a complementary issue to what we talked about yesterday, which was about identity. Today we're talking about the real problems of the region and the conflict of it. I think what we just saw from our three previous colleagues of mine, or who are all Iraqi enthusiasts, are a good I would say landscape, clarity of the landscapes regarding being proactive, regarding being looking at it from a regional European neighbor plus a global partner of ours. Also what Alberto just talked about in relation to the new trend or new realism taking place in Washington in relation to the US view of the region is also refreshing to hear. I think for the Iraqis to hear it directly, I think, I thank you for it. It's blunt, but I think it's refreshing as well. So to that effect, I think I'd like to take us one step backward first and look at the global challenge. When we look at the Middle East as a region, or MENA more specifically, do we complement the issues globally, or do we contradict it? Do the issues we have are of issues of global concern, or is it more local issues in which the rest of the world has to worry about us? That's the key issue. Terrorism is certainly a global phenomenon in which the epicenter may have been the Middle East. So that's one sign. But when nuclear, maybe. Cyber, I don't think so. Human trafficking, maybe. Environment, we are not even there in any debate. So we, in the people of the region, need to understand in relation to the rest of the globe, where do we fit? Do we fit at the top of 3 or 4 or 5 priority issues, or are we laying behind dealing with 20th or 19th century issues for them? When we talk about nation state and identities, the worlds are trying to get beyond that. When we talk about globalization and its ramification, we're trying to catch up. The others are saying we need to look beyond globalization, or post-globalization, or anti-globalization. My point is, do we follow up or do we lead in relation to these issues? That's an important factor. The US, as a superpower, unipower for a while, global power for some time to come, is somewhat disinterested in the region. Do we need to get it more interested for the right reason, or are we happy for us to have less US engagement because they have not done the good job? That's the key issues which we players in the region need to answer ourselves. We should not have others to be more royal than the king. I think Ambassador Fernandez is spot on. But do we know that? Or do we expect the big brother to be there to help us? This is intra-politics and inter-politics as well. So to me, where do we fit in the region? It's an important aspect. Then we go to the next stage. What are the current global or regional tools to resolve our conflict or to de-escalate our conflicts? Arab League, is it the right forum? Islamic organizations, is it the right forum? UN, is it the right forum? Could we reach out to EU? Is there any regional, what you might call dynamics or strategic framework for dialogue taking place? I don't see it. So to me, I am optimistic in a sense of necessity will need us to push us there, but do we have the tools to do it? No. Do we even have the visions at this moment? Do we have what you might call historical leadership in our own countries to push us to provide a platform for us to resolve our issues, independent of needing US or independent of needing China in the near future or independent of needing EU? Or do we say, well, we are next to Europe, human trafficking, others is a necessity, it's a European problem to help us with. So here it is an issue of proactiveness versus reactivity. And others will not be more royal than the king, and therefore anybody will deal with us, there is a cost associated with it. There is an irreversible cost with it, irreversible damage. When our minorities are irreversibly damaged and go to the United States or elsewhere, when our heritage is wrecked because of ISIS, when slavery is reintroduced into human development in the 21st century, these are irreversible damages. The scars on the Yazidis is for life. It's not going to go away. You know, it's an issue we have. We need to really take a stock of that. Let me give you an example. 3 years ago, everybody praised Prime Minister Ibadi, supported him 4 years ago when he started. They literally broke every protocol to support him because they needed him to lead the fight against ISIS. Okay, good. We worked on that, paid a lot of cost, Iraqis, I mean, in all kinds of things. Iraqis expected the world to be grateful for it. But now, at this time, in October 2018, our neighbors globally, they say, you need to pay up for it. We have a fight against Iran called the American drive against the Iranian regime. Iraqis has to take sides. Rather than us being praised for it and appreciated and rewarded, now people saying you have to take positions. You are with us or against us. So these are the new realities we Iraqis have to address. It's not nice, it's ugly actually, but that's the realities we have to address. So to me, here comes a new factor, which is what are the, what you might call, not red herring, what are the, I think this is, let me get the right wording for it. What are the wild cards which may affect the situation? What's taking place in Washington in relation to US engagement, disengagement in the region, That's a strategic wild card. Lack of ability of our institutions to address our issues, whether it's Arab League or any other league we have in place, is a strategic place. So these are the issues. The issues of identity, which is yet not clear. What is identity in relation to what we discussed yesterday? Nation state versus states versus intrastate. The roles of non-state actors like ISIS and others. These are all wild cards. Situation in Syria, how it affects us with Turkey, with others. So my point is there are too many wild cards, and this is worrying factor. With lack of historical leaders, with a throughput of high increase in population growth, which stops any economical development, which stops any serious review of your education or infrastructure, and the threat to Europe in relation to migration and others, these are wild cards which we in the region need to take stock of. We will pay whatever our fathers and grandfathers didn't do in relation to our rentier economy, in relation to other isms they have talked about before, which didn't work, whether it was Arabism, nationalism, whatever other isms they had before. So I think that reality needs to take place. What can be a tool to resolve it? Let's look at it in a positive way. Well, I think there has to be a serious review of what are the platforms for dialogue to take place. Not conflict resolution. I don't think we are there yet. We need to have the platform to have that discussion to identify what are the actual conflicts. Is it, as our Saudi friend talked about in his panel, where it's nothing to do with Islam and Sunni and others, it's to do with power and politics, or is it more to do with sectarianism and identity and other isms which we need to address as well? We need to have the right platforms defined, whether it's not Arab League, others, whether it's with our neighbors, with international partners, to address these, to have a serious dialogue take place. For dialogue to start with, we have to admit mistakes. Who is willing to admit mistakes? For dialogue to take place, we have to accept the other's point of view. Who is willing to wear other people's shoes? We can't. I mean, we were having a discussion earlier with the ambassador from the United States saying Trumpism, from my perspective, is not, it might be unique, but it's not a single person. It's an issue of communities and others supporting that narrative. So don't expect if the President Trump stays in power or not, that the issue of what he's raising will go away. It will not go away. That's the reality of the United States as is, whether we like it or not. That's maybe post-globalization. We like it or not, that's what we have to deal with. So to me, I think looking at it in a more, not global, but bigger picture, I think there is more fundamental issues we have not had the courage to address. Maybe I will stop there because I've raised a lot of issues and I've not been sort of specific about Iraq, but I would say, let me finish with this. In relation to Iraq, it is evolving, but nobody has clarity as to what's the end game. Nobody has yet set a division and say the end game is fully implement this constitution because it has problems, or the end game is for us to live in cohesion using, for example, other methods of governance, whether it's confederation or others, in relation internal within Iraq, or that Basra need to be a federal entity, or others. We have not even got there. Nobody has defined that vision for us. We have not had that discussion. What we're trying to do is get some tools in place, some democratic tools, some debate, some ability to accommodate the other, and so on. That's a good sign. But with the vast amount of baggage our new prime minister will have to worry about, with the new influx of a tsunami called anti-Iranian drive led by United States, to me, I'm worried about that. Who has the ability to manage that complexity? Who has the ability to define some solution and to bring the people who are the good politicians to bring people to us to push us in that direction? And I'll finish there. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Faley. I think some of the points that you raised are definitely important, because especially when we're speaking about where Iraq really fits in this picture and what role Iraq can play, I think that definitely, in Iraq, one of the problems is that we always talk about what a great country Iraq has been, and we always keep on talking about our past. Maybe it is time to really rethink what the values are that we should stand up for what the Iraqi citizens should stand up for, because we may have a democratic process, but we really don't have the democratic values instilled in Iraq just yet. I'm actually going to do something unusual, and I'm going to give each of you maybe 2 minutes if you want to rebut some of what one of the other panelists had said, and then we'll open the floor to questions. Is that okay with you, Ambassador?
Sure.
Ambassadors?
Sure.
So, Mr. Yildiz?
Yes, maybe I can dwell more on Iraq to agree with the other speakers as to the special role that Iraq can play. Maybe that would be too much to ask from Iraq, but Iraq has a huge responsibility when it comes to the stabilization and of certain dynamics in the region, because Iraq, as it is geography tells, it's right at the center of all these, intersection of all these dynamics. And Iraq has a lot to share with all the different dynamics in the region. So it's not the right time or place maybe to ask Iraq to take sides at all. Iraq will act as its own, will tell itself to go. But if Iraq hears its own people's voices, I should say Iraq will be the right, let's say, average that we all want to see in this region. Iraq has a lot to share with Iran, with Turkey, with Syria, and with the South as well. So we put a lot responsibility on Iraq, but of course, this is the time that we reach out to Iraq so that it can express itself with its own identity. That's why we cherish the Iraqi identity that much. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
I think Ambassador Fatih has really raised the burning point here, and it's about, and also what you have been saying, Ambassador Faili, and certainly you have addressed it, and I think the four of us have addressed this matter. And the question is, because we have been engaged with government formation and a certain void in the political leadership that during this period, the question of the final stage of the sanctions on the 5th of November is going to be the main and first challenge for the new government to address. We all know it's impossible to comply with that for Iraq at this present moment, because nearly a third of its electricity is now basically imported from Iran, either in gas or in electricity, most of it actually in the Kurdish region, apart from Basra. The application of sanctions will basically bring a big chunk of the Iraqi economy underground, undermining economic reforms, and basically bringing that into criminal networks that at the end will benefit those who are supposed to be punished by it. And the third thing is going to be the international side effects in terms of the conflictuality, or what Ambassador Faili was saying about taking sides, be against or for something. Something that Iraq can badly afford in its current state. So Iraq is going to be going through a tremendous pressure, and I have maybe Ambassador Fernandez can say how, if he's optimistic about Iraq, how maybe can this be addressed, or if the US may have some solution for this predicament.
Yes.
Well, the United States, of course, has played, I think, a key role in helping Iraq since 2003, since the liberation. By the way, I noticed this morning that there was an EU ambassador here who kept referring to 2003 as the American intervention. I prefer to call it the US-led liberation of Iraq from the dictator Saddam Hussein, but that's my view. I think the side that Iraq has to take is Iraq's side. And it is in America's interest, and it's in anyone who wishes Iraq well, that we find ways to highlight, to strengthen, to mobilize steps that lead towards Iraqi sovereignty, to strengthen Iraq as an entity, as a people with its diversity, as a people with all of its different groups and ethnicity, but also as a state. And that doesn't mean centralization. That doesn't mean anything like that. But it means everything that goes into strengthening what is Iraq, whether it is at the micro or macro level. This is something that we have to be in favor of. I was talking last night to a very influential Iraqi observer who was telling me, to your point, this is a person who's an Iraqi who knows Iraq very well, obviously, and he was telling me his concern that well before whatever sanctions come, the decision has been made in Tehran already for a certain outcome, not in Iraq, but in the region. Iran is preparing for war in the region in places where it's not already at war in the region. And it will use whatever tools that it has to do so. If that is something in Iraq or someone in Iraq or someone somewhere else, they will certainly do so, and that subversion will continue. That's why it's in America's interest, and it's in the interest of, I think, Iraqi patriots and people who wish the region well, to work to strengthen institutions. And I don't say state institutions, because often when you say that, people think that means, the central government ruling and controlling people. I don't mean that at all. I mean everything. Whether you're talking about civil society, whether you're talking about the rule of law, whether you're talking about a free press, whether you're talking about democracy or economic self-sufficiency, those are all ways of strengthening that entity, which is Iraq.
Thank you. Just to that point, actually, and I know Ambassador Faley touched on it, is the fact that America's disengagement in Iraq was too early. I mean, I can definitely tell you in the years when the SOFA agreement came forward and so on, and that really was part of this turmoil that we're seeing. Again, that's my opinion. Ambassador Faley, if you have a couple of minutes to, if there's anything that you want to rebut from what the gentleman said.
Going back to the issues of dialogue, for us to identify that we need dialogue, we need to define the funneling. How do we go about funneling those issues? My concern at this moment is with lack of dialogue, you may have lack of alignment of interest, you may have the danger of misreading, and therefore people going on autopilot on projects which will not be to the interest of their partners. Iraq cannot build a wall as much as the US wanted to build a wall against Mexico. No, we can't do that. So Iraq cannot associate itself from the region. It is an early warning country in relation to regional threats because of the cosmopolitan nature of its diversity in more than one way. So it is an early warning system. But also we need to understand that situation we are in because of our actions or our lack of inaction to these issues. So Iraqis could not get rid of dictator by themselves. The US did it. There is a cost associated with that. We Iraqis do not yet understand the cost associated with change of Saddam regime. We still don't know it. We still have not psychologically even thought about it. And therefore, at this moment, we still expect the US to help us in areas. They will not. That's the new reality of the US, or European or others as well. So I think what we faced with ISIS, what we faced with Basra recently, these are wake-up calls. When do you need to wake up? As communities, what took place in Basra, people in Kurdistan need to worry about it, not just people in Baghdad. That's, to me, the new reality.
Thank you. And now we open the floor to questions. We'll take... I want to give an opportunity, and I am going to play the women card, I'm sorry. I'm going to try and get as many women to speak up in this session. So ladies, this is your opportunity. So we'll start here, then we'll take a bunch, but I'll try and be as fair as possible. Yes, because there's been a lot of talk in how there's an absence of voice of women, but I do see there are many in the crowd here, so let's hear from them.
But I can ask in Kurdish, please.
I can maybe, yeah, I'll do a quick translation. بەڵام مادام ترجمة دەکەم نەختێک بمختصری بۆی بتوانم بەباشی بان ترجمة بکەم.
زۆر سپاس بۆ بەڕێزان کە بۆ ئەم پانێڵە کە دانیشتوین. من ئەمێ پرسیارێک لە میستەر فاتح بکەم. بەنسبەت ئەوەی کە باسی کرد موشکیلەی فەڵەستین هەیە و دیارە زۆر متەئەسیرن بە قەزەی فەڵەستینی. لە کاتێکە لە داخڵی وڵاتەکەی خۆیانە قەزەیەکی زۆر گەورەتر هەیە لە قەزەی فەڵەستینی. ئایا بۆچی لە پێشە ئەولەویەت نایەن بە کێشەکانی ناو وڵاتی خۆیان اینجا تەماشای کێشەی وڵاتێکی تر بکەن؟ ئایا کوردستان بەو هەموو کێشە و ناخۆشیانە ڕووی لە شەڕی داعیشە خۆی زانێ کە کوردەکانی یەزیدی چیان بەسەر هات بەس دەست داعیشەوە ئەو هەموو ئافرەت و ئەو هەموو کوشتارە کرا لە ناو کوردستانە نەمان بینی تورکیا وەکو پێویست هیچ مووقفێکی دەربڕێ بەنسبەت ئەو هەموو کارە ساتە کە هات وە شتێکی حاشا هەڵنەگریشە کە بریندارەکانی داعش لە ناو خاکی تورکیا چارەسەرەکران.
سپاس.
ئەمە پرسیارێک بەنسبەت میستەر فاتح. پرسیارێکم هەیە بۆ هەر چوارێ.
یەک دقیقە یان چاوەڕێ بکەین تا ئەوەی جیهاز ترجمەکانیان بۆ بێنن یان بەس مەجالێکم دێ بۆی ئەوەی بۆ ترجمە بکەمەوە نەختێ بە خێرایی. I'm just going to translate very quickly what this lady said because I know you guys did not have your translation equipment. She said that it seems that you are quite affected by the Palestinian issue. Meanwhile, there is an issue within your own country and your own land that you have not or you're shying away from talking about. And you know, and everything that has happened, especially what happened to the Yazidi people and what we saw in terms of what Daesh did in Mosul. And she's saying that, and it was very unfortunate that there was not a strong statement coming out of Turkey, because if you are talking about injustice, this great injustice that was done, and there wasn't a frank statement that came out, and also the fact that some of the Daesh, the wounded, were being treated in Turkey. So. Okay. زۆر بە کورتی بۆی
هەمومان نەزانین 48 ملیۆن کەس ئەگەر زیاتریش نەبین بە ناوی کوردەوە هەتا ئێستا دەوڵەتێکمان نییە هەمومان نەزانین ساڵی پار کە ڕیفراندۆم کرا لە ساڵ 93 و بەرەو سەر و میلەتی کوردەنگی دا بۆی کە دەوڵەتێکی سەربەخۆی هەبێ هیچ دەوڵەتێ پشتگیری نەکردین لە پێش هەموویەوە تورکیا هەمویان دژمان وەستان باشە هەمووش باسی کێشەی ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاست دەکەن.
یەک دقیقە ببوورە سەماعەکە نزیکاتەوە کنی ئەن سەماعەکە نزیکەوە لەبەر تەرجمە.
بەڵێ باش هەموومان نەزانین باسی کێشەکانی ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاست دەکەن دروستکردنی دەوڵەتی کوردی بەشێکی زۆری کێشەکانی ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاست چارەسەرەکە ئەوە شتێکی حاشا هەڵنەگرە ئەی باشە بۆیە کە یێتە سەرفعلی هەموو دژیە وەستن.
زۆر سپاس. I'm going to take another question before we answer. The lady in the back.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much. This has been very, very interesting session. I do agree with so many of Your Excellency's points. One of the very important points, in my view, is that ISIS is something that's repeating in the region over and over, and it's all linked somehow. So my question is, have any of like the gentlemen sitting in the panel ever considered like combining science and understanding from a science point of view why this is repeating itself? Because I do agree that this is an issue that we Iraqis have to think about and solve. But the one thing that we did not talk about is why it keeps coming back from a psychological and social point of view, where we have science that can help us understand in the next next phase of demobilization. And myself as a scholar, we struggle quite a lot when we try to convey this point anywhere. And I do understand that we're talking about politics here,
Thank you.
but like when we talk about power, we have to talk about the abuse of power and the psychological factors behind that.
Thank you.
you so much.
Thank you. There's that lady over here in the middle. Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate the support for women. My question may be a little strange, but Mr. Ambassador Fernandez, Brett McGurk met with several key decision makers in the Kurdistan region prior to the recent Iraqi elections, and there have been rumors about the United States' alleged involvement in encouraging, if you will, a certain candidate to run during the elections for the presidency position. Although it is my understanding that the president's role is ceremonial and therefore may not make much sense, however, do you think that there may be any truth to this rumor? And has the United States decided to renew its commitments to stabilizing this country through the Iraqi presidency? Thank you.
If it's all right with you, I think I'm going to take all the questions and then give you each time to answer them, because I know some. This gentleman here at the front,
زۆر سپاس. من پرسیارێکم لە بەڕێز باڵوێزی تورکیای العێراق. پرسیارێکی منەوەیە، حەز ناکەن ئێستا تورکیا لە قوڵای استراتیژی دا و دۆغڵ و لای داوە کە یەک لە خاڵە هەر ئەساسیەکان لەو ئەفخاڵێک کە هەبوو سفرکردنەوەی کێشەکان بوو لە ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاستدا. ئایا حەز ناکەن ئێستا ئێوە لەو خاڵەڵاتاندایە بە تایبەتی لە دوای 25 نۆ بۆ هەرێمی کوردستان؟ پرسیارێکیش بۆ بەڕێز فەرناندۆ کە زۆر ڕەش بوون بوو بەرامبەر بە ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوێن و ناوچەکە. ئایا ئەمریکا خۆی بەشێکە لەم یاریەکە لە ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاست دەگوتێ یان کارکتەرێکە بۆ چارەسەرکردنی ئەم کێشانی ڕۆژهەڵات؟ سپاس.
زۆر سپاس. This gentleman had his hand. I'll get to everybody.
Thank you. My question is more sharp regards the role of Russia in the region and what the speakers think about this aspect and what are the implications for the future. Thank you.
Sorry, about what if you...
Role of Russia in the region.
Russia, yes.
Thank you.
Okay. And that question over there?
Yeah, Vladimir Wilgenburg. I have a question to the Turkish ambassador. Can he maybe also talk about, is there any possibility to return to a peace process in Turkey for the Kurds? Because now there's a lot of instability in Turkey because there's no more peace process. And also, I was wondering if there's any improvement in the relation between Turkey and Iran, because Turkey opposed the Kurdish independence referendum. Because in 2017, Erdogan called Hasid Shaabi terrorist, but after the referendum, it seems the relations between Turkey and Hasid Shaabi and also with Iran are much better.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to take the last question from this gentleman here.
زۆر سپاس بۆ دەستگای میری، سپاس بۆ ئێوەش. کاتێ بۆ بارەگای یۆناثە چووم کە دەواازەکەی قوتی دام، ڕەشم بینی ئاڵایان هەبوو، سپیم بینی ئاڵایان هەبوو، هەرچێم بینی ئاڵایان هەبوو، قیژاندیان گوتیان ئەی بێ وڵات بۆ دەرەوە، ئەی بێ ئاڵا بۆ دەرەوە. منیش وتم مەقیژێنن کە ئەچمەوە بۆ کوردستان، ئەم چیرۆکە بۆ مناڵانە جێرمەوە. ئەوە بۆ بەڕێزت، بۆ بەڕێزت یەس. ئێستا ئێمە کوردستانین، لە تورکیاوە تۆ بارانێکی زۆر بەسەر گوندەکانی مەدا دەکرێتن. بەڕاستی ئێمە خەڵکی خۆمان لە گوندەکان دەژین، هەمویان ئاوارە بووینە. ئێمەش وەکو ڕێکخراوەکانی کۆمەڵگەی مەدەنی دەبێ بە جواب بین بۆ ئەوەی ئێوە ئاگایەکتان لەو خەڵکە فەقیرە هەبیتن کە ئاوارە دەبن بە تایبەتی گوندنشینەکانی کوردستان. زۆر سپاس بۆ ئێوە بۆ هەموو لایەکتان.
Thank you. So you each have 5 minutes to answer and maybe even make your final statements as well. So I know many of the questions were directed towards you. So I'm not even going to ask my questions. I'm just going to give you a chance to answer everybody else's question. Okay, great. Ambassador Faili was generous and he said that you can have his time.
So
yes, go ahead.
Yeah, it seems that I'm the popular one, so in terms of the questions. But anyways, yeah, when it comes to your question, it's very normal. The Turks always, need to face those parallels when we speak about the rights of Kurds and a future possible Kurdistan, a free Kurdistan. We always, face such parallels when it comes to our policies with Palestine, with Cyprus, with our reaction to what happened in Nagorno-Karabakh under the occupation of Armenia. These are all parallels that are always reminded to us, and we understand this. And we always say that, each situation needs to be, analyzed within its own context and in its own framework. Meaning that, when we refer to the, sufferings that the Palestinians, are facing, our Kurdish friends would agree with us that, we're talking about a land that's under occupation. And that occupation didn't start just with 1948, but continued. And that is a call that we make all, and not only for Turks, but for Kurds as well. We're 100% sure that Kurds disagree what's happening in Palestine as well. When it comes to our Kurdish friends, Kak Masood once said, he said, I'm not an enemy of Turkish state, I'm a friend of Turks, he said. So I can repeat the same thing for here as well. We're friend of Kurds and we're not an enemy of any potential Kurdish entity that we're talking about. And I am now, with my own 2 feet in that, Kurdish entity that we are referring to. And we totally, agree with the fact that Kurds are an essential ingredient in all these, geographies that Kurds extend their hands, ranging from Syria to Iran to Turkey. And that's why maybe I can, answer the question that was raised regarding what's happening with the Kurds in Turkey. Turkey has come a long way when it comes to, addressing the Turkish citizens who have the Kurdish ancestry. And frankly speaking, these are not just we're talking about the implementation of certain policies, but we're talking about constitution and all legal aspects that we are referring to. And there is always a tendency to relate Turkey's policies with the PKK terrorism, as Turkey, somewhat, loses, or let's say distresses the importance of these legal and other reforms regarding its Kurdish citizens. Frankly speaking, it's got nothing to do with PKK, and PKK, in fact, terrorism has never been related with the Kurds themselves at all as well in Turkey, because the most that suffered from the Kurdish terrorism, from the PKK terrorism, were all those areas that were inhabited by our Kurdish citizens. So, in fact, the Kurdish terrorism, the PKK terrorism, was the reason that we went ahead with all these reforms. I didn't reject, no, I didn't, disagree with the fact that, Turkey is a work in progress. We have a long way to go when it comes to those reforms. And we set certain benchmarks, not only for ourselves, but for the others in the region as well. So Turkey is a friend of the Kurds, and Turkey has its own citizens who are Kurds. So therefore, there is no other way to define the relation of the Turks to the Kurds. It's all about friendship that I'm referring to. Another question regarding Hashishabi. Hashishabi is a fact of the field. Hashishabi fought against the Daesh terrorists, and frankly speaking, it is comprised of different elements, but we don't deny the fact, and Iraqi authorities do not deny the fact that there are elements in Hashishabi who are detrimental to the unity of Iraq itself. So we always make a distinction about the Hashishabi elements. Therefore, we pay respect to whom. This may be the Peshmerga, this may be the Jaish, Federal Police, or Hashishabi itself, who fought against terrorists. And therefore, Hashishabi is included in that. But we have certain groups that we always caution that, that we need to be careful about their actions. So that is still the distinction that we keep regarding the Hashishabi. Bombardments in the north, in fact, it's a fact that, there are terrorists that are, aiming the Turkish and Kurdish lives in Turkey. And that's what we are doing. We are taking an action against those terrorists. Our wish, our call to our Iraqi friends, of course, to take that joint action against those terrorists. And frankly speaking, we have come a long way in terms of that cooperation. And KRG is one of our major, partners in terms of addressing that threat to Turkey. So what we are doing, in fact, is addressing a terrorist organization that is a target, a threat for us all. When it comes to the civilians, Turkey pays great importance to not hurting any single civilians at all. And we are in always direct contact with our friends in KRG in terms of, avoiding this in our operations. And we are well aware that this has humanitarian aspects, and those humanitarian aspects need to be definitely borne in mind by Turkey, by Iraqi authorities, by KRG as well. And there is no denial that, as long as Iraq cannot address this problem internally, Turkey will be on board in terms of addressing it. Our demand, our wish, our call to our Iraqi friends is we need to be doing this in the most cooperative fashion. Thank you.
Thank you. Master Fernandez. Yes.
First thing, McGurk and presidential candidate, I have no idea. I don't know what he's been plotting. You should ask him, because I don't know. That's an easy one to answer. On the question on ISIS, there's a problem with the way some people see the world. And I don't mean ISIS, what I'm talking about now is there are too many people, especially in the West, who think in our globalist age that the most important thing is what we call homo economicus, economic man, that is the essential element. A wise man once said, man does not live by bread alone. ISIS, as horrible and perverted and violent as it was, appealed to something, this is maybe crazy for people, appealed to something positive for the people that it was fighting for, right? It's a utopian worldview, an idealistic worldview for them, not for their victims. This is a revolutionary movement. When people are unhappy, when situations are complicated, when people have nothing to hold on to, you enter a revolutionary stage, and you have all kinds of people we've seen in history, whether communists or fascists, who promote a kind of utopian worldview, and this is attractive for some people. And I think one of the problems we see in the West, as I said, is we think that people do not aspire to something greater than themselves. And people do, whether that is al-ummah or al-khilafa or the kingdom of heaven or utopia. That desire in men for something greater than themselves exists, and it will always be used by dictators, by tyrants, by psychopaths. It exists, and it's something that we have to deal with. The gentleman who asked about I'm pessimistic about the region and about the U.S. role. There are some people who may think the U.S. role in the region is good. There are some people who think that the U.S. role in the region may be bad. I think the U.S. role overall has been positive, not negative. That's why we're not sitting right now in the President Uday Hussein Conference Hall in Erbil, for example. I think that is, at the end of the day, a positive thing. But my view is this: even if you think America's role in the region is negative, there's a problem. All too often in the region, people blame the other, right? اللوم هو على أمريكا أو اللوم هو على اليهود أو إسرائيل أو ما بعرف مين. It's always somebody else's fault. The great problems of the region are by, from, and within the region. Colonial powers, imperialists, Westerners, Martians could have made it worse, could have made it better, but the essential problems of the region are inside it and are endemic to the region. And so there's a problem that we have when we focus on the American role or the Israeli role or the Chinese role or whatever, is that it distracts from looking in the mirror and seeing your own responsibility for your own actions. In conjunction with that, the gentleman who talked about the Russian role, I think the Russian role is obviously negative in the sense that it is intimately tied with some of the most destructive forces in the region. But looking at it from the Russian point of view, I think what they're doing makes perfect sense. They are projecting power and looking for like-minded allies in the region. And they are going to subvert, extend their efforts, manipulate, try to fill the vacuum and the space that was created, especially as a result of those 8 years of the Obama administration, which I think gave Russia tremendous opportunity to do mischief in the region. Thank you.
Thank you. Ambassador Faley, do you have a...
Specific, to be honest, to add, just one big issue.
So can I ask you one specific question then? Because I know there weren't many questions that came to you, but what role can Iraq really play? Can Iraq, and especially now that we are talking about the formation of government and some of the names that are being thrown around, can we actually maintain or play the balancing act between the East and the West? From your experience, and I know from your connections and so on, but I really want a frank answer that, so hopefully it does give us hope.
As a diplomat, this is a strange answer I'm going to give, which is I don't believe in this balancing game. I've never believed in it. I think it's near impossible to achieve because you have contradicting requirements from the players. There has not been any serious dialogue between the Iranian and the American, and therefore you expect to be a balance between both without having the capability internally, internal political cohesion, economical independency, a need for the other for you. The other need to identify they need you, not just that there is an actual need, but the other has to be proactive, identify that they need you. So to me, this balancing power, which everybody talks about and expects the new prime minister to be the masterful controller of it, I don't believe in it for a number of reasons. I don't think you need to take sides in the normal sense of politics, but I also think that we have enough strength of our own, the need internally, our own, get our act together. The others will come back to you and say, please get involved in fixing our problem for us. At this moment, I think we're too fragile for us to be a balancing act. It doesn't mean that we could be cavalier and throw ourselves at any partner of ours or neighbor of ours because that we think this will do. No, it will make us more vulnerable. And we have seen clear examples of the ISIS situation. ISIS was caused because of our internal politics not being managed and externally problems which we're not able to defend, which meant that others will need something from you in return, whether it's American bases, whether it's Iranian hegemony control, or whether for you to be the backyard of somebody else. These are the realities. My big takeaway from that is there are irreversible damage to issues. Have you taken stock of them? That's a real politic I believe in, not in this balancing game people promote. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it means in real politics.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. And before we actually close the session, I wanted to invite Dr. Delawar for some final.
Just come here,
Sure.
Well, before you close the session in your own way, can I just say a couple of things? You can see there is an empty seat here, but actually there should have been 2 empty seats here. There were 2 seats reserved, one for His Excellency Ambassador Maxim Maximov, and another one for His Excellency Ambassador Masjidi. Both of them tried their best to be with us, and both could not make it. And Ambassador Masjidi could not make it because of Al-Arba'in. They're very busy with more than 2 million visitors coming from Iran this time of the year. So he actually tried his best to send his deputy. Again, in his absence, the deputy would have been just as busy, and the Consul General here is away. Otherwise, would have created the right balance. Maybe we wouldn't have mixed an American with an Iranian, but actually Ambassador Alberto is not an ambassador anymore. So he could have sat there as an academic or as a media person. So this would have allowed both Russia and Iran to defend their point of view and communicate their policies to us all. So that is one. And we also had an empty seat, a reserved seat in the previous panel for an academic, and Sayyid Kazem Sajjadpur. He actually was just about to buy the ticket for coming here, and at the last minute something happened and he couldn't be here. Otherwise, plenty of opportunity for them were reserved to communicate, as I said, their policies and maybe defend themselves and create and engage in a real debate. So this is the reason. We tried our best, they tried our best. There's nothing negative or sinister about it. This place, MERI Forum, is a place of debate. Free debate between everyone, all the intellectuals who are involved in policy making, decision making, experts, academics, media people. It is the right place to mix all the different points of view. So we are proud of the fact that we've always achieved that. And today we did that as well. Yesterday we did that. Another imbalance I'm going to go back to, which is to do with women. The first panel was about governance and local government empowerment. I wish there were a few women governors running provinces in Iraq, but there weren't any. I wish there were enough women actually in the top leadership, decision makers of each party among the Shias, Sunnis, or Kurds. You cannot find. They are just not the top leaders. So we couldn't help in the second panel either. But the other panels, there were always women there, and there's always talent there. There's always no shortage in academic and in other ways. But I still feel embarrassed that at MERI we should have had a proper gender balance. And I'm really grateful for your understanding, but I am the first one to admit that we, just like the rest of the society, could not get it right. I want to go back to say the purpose of this forum was to generate debate. It was part of our research. Every panel was part and parcel of our research that we've done a lot about in the past, and this complements that. And every video, every report in this forum will be uploaded on our website for further research use and so on. We've met all our objectives, and I'm very grateful to every speaker, everyone present. And I'm afraid this is the last panel because of unforeseen circumstances. So I want to thank everybody who participated, the media, the sponsors, Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, K24, and the other Empire, as well as Rabit al-Masarif, and I don't know who else I forgot, EU for their grant. But without you guys' participation, enthusiasm, and willingness to engage in debate, it wouldn't have been possible. And I'm going to let Tanya Khan to finish the panel in her own way.
Thank you. Thank you, Kak Doctor. Thanks. I think I'm just going to reiterate what some of what Dr. Lauer said, is that what we have been used and what we have been seeing over the years from the MERI Forum is that it is a space for dialogue. It is a space for open dialogue. So the fact that we are allowing questions to be asked, and very frank questions, and some of the hard questions that I know that were asked, but this is something that has been very important for us, because as we sit here in the Kurdistan region, or well, I can speak for myself when I sit here, it's very important for me to understand how the global world sees us and what influence I can have as an individual, as a citizen, to make sure that we are part of this dynamic change that is happening, and our rights, whether as Kurds, as Iraqis, as women, etc., that are being protected. So again, I want to thank each and every one of you, and I thank you for your frankness and for your patience with us, and I thank all of you for listening. I hope you have a wonderful evening, and let's give our panelists a hand. Thanks.